Good afternoon, I hope everyone's well today. Thank you for watching. As always, it is appreciated. If you find value in this video, consider liking and subscribing. It does help the channel out a lot. And maybe share it again if you think it's useful. There was a poll that came out recently, and there was a partial debate that I want to show on the channel as well from GB News. The poll that came out says 1 in 5 Britons aged 18 to 45 prefer unelected leaders to democracy, poll finds. Exclusives. Voters overall are downbeat about politics, and almost 6 in 10 think the UK best years are behind us. And then we'll get into a bit of the article as well, just to give you a bit more context. 1 in 5 Generation Z and Millennial Britons prefer stronger leaders without elections to democracy, and voters overall are feeling downbeat about politics, a report has found. The polling, due to be published next week as part of the FGS Global Radar Report, found that overall 14% of people agreed with the statement that the system will run the country effectively as a strong leader who doesn't bother with elections, rather than the alternative. The best system for running the country effectively is democracy. This vote is 21% of people aged between 18 and 45 who answered that the best system was a strong leader without elections. In contrast, only 8% of people over 55 preferred the system to democracy. So that's the context. It seems on paper to assert that many people become disillusioned with democracy. I personally am not, and I'm going to get into the context of why that would be in a minute or two. I'm going to play the video now. This is from a contributor who's right of centre. His name is Charlie Downs. Very well put together. Usually, I don't think it's fair that he goes on debates. I really don't, because I've said this and I've used this analogy before. It's like a great white shark circling a harbour seal. It's just I feel sorry for his opponents. He's usually that articulate and he's that good at putting his points across. It's just like shooting fish in a barrel. There's probably better uses for his time than going on GB News. That being said, I'm going to play the clip. I'm going to pause it sparsely in between, and I'm going to unpick a few of the things that he says.
We turn to Charlie Downs now. I mean, what does this say about young people in this country?
Well, Tom, I wrote an article about this very topic in the Mail last year when a similar poll to the one that's come out today was released that indicated that it was actually half of Gen Z who are a bit disaffected with democracy and would favour a dictatorship. It doesn't have to do with parliament or elections or any of these sorts of things. And in that article, I laid out some very similar points. So I said about housing is unaffordable. There's no real sense of identity or belonging in this country. Where that does exist is, I think, rapidly disappearing. Many people feel like they don't recognise this country anymore. Young people, many of them want to leave. They want to go to live in places in Europe. They want to go to Dubai and so on. And then when we are presented with the opportunity to make our voice heard at an election, when we do so, when we vote, when we participate in this ritual, nothing seems to actually change. And what it actually seems to result in is nothing more than a change in the public-facing element of the state.
He is making a very powerful and he's making a articulate point. Now, this point is backed up by people who have been on the inside of governments, which is Dominic Cummings. He's done press releases and he's done tours and speaking to different people, and he spells this out specifically. The fact is that the public-facing individuals, the Prime Minister, the Home Secretary, Foreign Secretary, they're given predetermined scripts, so the outcome's already been fated. So your elected politician, in effect, is just the spokesperson, i.e., they've become the very thing that they were brought in to replace, which is the absolute monarch. Now, the Prime Minister, our Prime Minister, theoretically at this point, is the most powerful chief executive in the Western world, based on the way our system is meant to run. War, peace, recognising countries or unrecognising countries are all powers that are in the monarch. They are in the person of the monarch. They are royal powers under the royal prerogative, but they are exercised or meant to be exercised by properly elected individuals, civilians. That is the way our system is meant to work. Anyway, that's an aside. Well, it's besides the point. I'm going to play the clip by Tomlin Cummings now, and then we'll come back to this in a moment or two. So I'm going to play this clip now.
In Whitehall now, right, in meetings, they are literally scripted. So when the Prime Minister has a meeting with ministers, what happens is that before the Prime Minister has that meeting, officials go into the Prime Minister's study and they give him a folder. And in the folder at the front is a thing called Chairman's Notes. And that's the script, and that's what the Prime Minister reads out. And the conclusions of the meeting are in the Chairman's Notes, drafted before the meeting happens, right? So the Prime Minister says, hello, Secretary of State, blah, 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 and all these officials sit around the sides on chairs around the edge of the room. And then the MP, the Secretaries of State, will look down at their folders because they've all got their scripts, right? And this is why I use the NPC lead, right? Because then the Prime Minister reads out, well, we're here to discuss blah, blah, and then he goes around the room, and then the Secretary of State for Justice or the Foreign Secretary reads out his bullet points, and then he reads out their bullet points, and they read out. If anyone goes on the script, you see the officials sort of go, and then look over at the other official on the side of the room.
So that's the Permanent Secretary to the Cabinet and the Permanent Secretary to the Prime Minister. They hold the cards, they're pulling the strings, so the ministers are not in charge of their portfolio, and all the decisions that they come out with have already been predetermined by the Permanent Civil Service, which is why, no matter if a Tory government gets in or a Labour government gets in, the tie colour changes and not much else, because the decisions have already been made. And that's what the democracy in the United Kingdom currently is, and this is what needs to change, in my view.
That means we'll come back to that after the meeting and make sure that that doesn't happen. And then at the end, it's a fascinating, great discussion. Thank you so much for your wonderful, insightful, original contributions. And then he reads out the conclusions for all drafted in advance. And it sounds like a parody, but it is literally how the British state functions.
And now we go on.
Where, whilst the actual direction of travel of the country seems to remain the same. So there is this sense that democracy, as it exists in the United Kingdom today, is a bit of a sham. It's kind of an exercise in theatre, because it seems that the people who are actually calling the shots and running the country on a day-to-day basis are not the people that we see on Question Time in the House of Commons. It does appear to be civil servants, permanent secretaries, people whose names many people don't know, people that we don't elect, and people who seem, by all accounts, very, very difficult to remove. So this is the deeper question here, is not whether democracy is good or bad, but whether we actually have a democracy in this country right now.
So we'll pause that here. What he's referring to is the blob, the deep state, a government within a government that actually can't be removed. The permanent secretaries, the permanent civil service, the infrastructure that's meant to be there impartially to actually do the government's will. They're the people that are actually making the decisions. Now you'll see this as well. This is why we're not doing anything about our small boats crisis and mass migration or illegal immigration into the United Kingdom currently. We're not doing it currently because we've got 4 years or 3 to 4 years before the next general election, in theory. So the permanent civil servants in our country can speak to other countries like Spain, like Greece, like Germany, that they've got elections that they need to fight, and they need to come down as more hardline on immigration at this point. So what happens is they just move where the immigration is going to be coming into the continent on a point-by-point basis. So you'll see the democracies, all the democracies on the continent, they can go to their electorate and they can turn around and say, look, we're doing something about immigration. Vote us back in. And it's rinse and repeat. You'll find, all of a sudden, about a year, maybe 6 months before our next general election, our Prime Minister will start getting really, really tough on immigration. Anyway, I digress slightly, we'll continue.
Because I think to many people, there is a feeling that, in fact, no, we don't have a democracy in this country because we have a government that locks people up for speech crimes, where we have a culture where expressing any degree of dissent from orthodoxy, from progressive social liberal orthodoxy, is met with social ostracization. That's something I've experienced in my own life. And where the education system, for example, teaches a very specific, very particular ideological view of history and of the world, that if you question, once again, you are sort of ostracized. People lose their jobs for these sorts of things. And so the question is not whether democracy is good or bad, it's whether we have a democracy in this country. And I personally don't feel that we do.
The democracy, the actual integrity of the system is sound. The actual functioning of the government is not. That's my view. The system is fine, but it's been perverted and subverted to vested interests. Now, those vested interests should always be the electorate, the people who are putting these people into positions of power. That's not what's happening. That doesn't mean interests aren't being served. It's just not yours and it's not mine.
And so, would it be preferable for us to have a leader that cuts through all of the nonsense that I have just described and restores a sense of strength, of honesty, most importantly, to this country? I can see the argument.
So you're saying basically democracy is actually an illusion. We're not really in a democratic state at all, because you've got the civil servants who are unelected, who are there, they stay on from subsequent governments, and then they're running things, you don't even know who they are or what they actually do, but they are in control. That is the point you're making. So are you saying then that you'd rather have one solid leader who actually properly led and didn't have all that, and you'd be happy with that, almost like a dictatorship, but that person is leading and they're actually in control?
I'm going to be very clear. That's the way our system's meant to work. Our Prime Minister is meant to be essentially an elected king or queen. That is the power. That is the office of the Prime Minister. We are still a medieval DNA in the United Kingdom. The state opening of parliaments. That's not, well, it is theatre, but it represents very real things. You've got the Lords, you've got the Monarch, you've got the Commons. That's the way it's meant to work. When the Prime Minister becomes Prime Minister, they are chief advisor to the sovereign. The sovereign's legal powers are intact and they are put into commission with the Prime Minister. So when people say, oh, we cannot deport people, well, we can. When people say, oh, we can't declare war willing, well, we can. When people say, we can't do this, we can't do that, we can't do that, they're making reasons and they're trying to put forward an excuse for why they don't want to do it. But legally and practically, they can do it. In fact, I've got some very interesting information here which I'll bring up here. These are the powers of the Prime Minister. What the PM can do without Parliament, i.e. under the royal prerogative. Deploying British troops. However, since 2003, it is a convention that it goes through Parliament. However, that is merely a convention. It's not law and it's not a legal requirement. So they can deploy British troops. So they can do that. So they're in charge, in effect, of the armed forces. War and peace. They can declare war. They can end hostilities. They can deploy military operations, or remain prerogative powers in law. Parliament's only real leverage is political, i.e. the MPs can topple a Prime Minister without strong party discipline, and financial, which is money bills. Anything that the government needs to raise money for, i.e. taxation, needs to go through Parliament. Those aren't legal. Those are specifically political and financial. Then you go on to this. Recognition and derecognisation of states. Or the executive. Parliament has no formal role. They can discuss and debate treaties, but that's pretty much it. Then you get on to this. Treaties again. The PM government can negotiate, sign and ratify treaties in the name of the King or Queen. Under Constitutional Reform and Governance Act 2010, treaties are laid before Parliament. They just discuss it. Parliament can delay the ratification, but they can't permanently veto it. So a bit like the House of Lords. And if a treaty recognises changes to UK law, Parliament must legislate to make it possible. And then finally, diplomacy and foreign policy. Diplomatic relations, appointing ambassadors, conducting negotiations, sanctions, mostly prerogative, although sanctions today are usually part of statutory footing in the Parliament. So in short, anything that government can do, apart from making new laws or making old laws and raising taxes, is under the royal prerogative. Anything, alright? That's literally the practical reality of the situation. So we're going to continue with the clip now.
Well, this I think is the key point here, Nana, is, all sort of systems, all political systems, regardless of what they call themselves, at a certain level, they are all structurally identical. Whether your system calls itself democracy or whether it calls itself a monarchy or communism or fascism or whatever, ultimately there is always a ruling class who are the people at the top of society who make the decisions about who govern the society. They are an organised minority elite, and then there is the disorganised mass of the people.
Is there a fundamental difference here, Charlie? Sorry to interrupt, but when it comes to dictatorships, very often what you have is a very paranoid style at the top of that dictatorship, because there isn't a clear mechanism by which a successor may emerge. And if there's an individual or a group that looks like they may be becoming a successor, very often they're purged, they're got rid of, they're sent to the gulag.
That's kind of what you're saying.
So what we see in dictatorships, unlike systems of rules-based order, whether that's succession through monarchical systems or indeed through democracy, is actually a much less stable system, paradoxically.
Well, what I would say to that is yes, modern secular dictatorship, like the ones seen in the 20th century, absolutely are unstable, and they will lead inevitably to chaos, because there is no accountability, and all of the rest of these arguments that many of us have heard for our entire lives. But actually, if you look back further than that, the system that I would actually genuinely favour as a Catholic, as a Christian, is a Christian monarchy, whereby the leader of the country is born into the role. They are not given a choice as to whether they carry out that role, and they are trained from birth to fulfil that role. And so that, in my view, is how you get the most effective leader. And then there is no question of succession, because it is hereditary.
Charlie just described the system that we have. We have a hereditary monarch. They're Christian. The coronation is literally a Christian ceremony in the Westminster Abbey. What he's arguing here, and I agree with him completely, is the perversion and the subversion of how the system is meant to function. Now, it's very, very good that he's doing things like this, and it's very, very good that this argument's getting on TV and getting airtime, because he's articulating to the layman, to people in the country that may not be aware of the system being subverted, specifically what Dominic Cummings said in my video earlier on, in what he literally said, that the public face, the Prime Minister and all the cabinet ministers, in effect have no power. So our democracy has been turned into a sham. The royal powers, the prerogative, should be exercised on the advice of the Prime Minister, and he's the first among equals, and he's not even accountable to Parliament for this. The only thing that he's accountable to Parliament for is money bills, raising taxes, and a legislation to make and unmake laws. That's literally it. So anything else within the remit of government is done under the prerogative. What he's arguing for is a restoration, a pre-1997, some may argue a pre-1972 restoration of the British system of government, the way the government is meant to function. This is why people argue that it's dysfunctional and it's by design. So it's very well played that GB News and Charlie are putting these arguments out, because he's articulating my exact view. And this is what needs to be changed. Anything that is restricting the way that the British rule themselves, either the European Communities Act of the early 1970s or anything that Tony Blair did when he got in 1997, needs to go. Anyway, we're going to end this clip here. So what do you think? Do you think Charlie's right? Do you think that I am right? Do you think that, as it currently stands, the public-facing people they're just essentially paid actors? They're not there to make policy, they're there to pacify the public and try to apologise when things go tits up. This is why I think we had 5 to 7 Tory Prime Ministers since 2010. Because as soon as they do something slightly out of line, they get boosted out. They're not actually allowed to implement any real change. These are just my thoughts. In terms of what type of ruler should we have, we definitely shouldn't have the presidential system in America, in my view. It's too constrained by the Congress and the Supreme Court, which is why we shouldn't have a Supreme Court in the UK, which was only invented in 2009, and that was simply to put guardrails on our democracy. So I don't think we need the American system, and I don't think we need the French system, which is a semi-presidential system, where essentially the President of France handles foreign policy, and their Prime Minister deals with domestic policy. I don't think that would work either. There's a reason why France has had 3 monarchies and 5 republics, because it's completely dysfunctional states. Then you look at ours, okay, we have a monarch and we have a prime minister. Now, the way that it's meant to work is pretty much the best system that we've got. However, it's been subverted by the elites, the globalists, and that's what we need to push against. These are just my thoughts. As always, your mileage may vary. Like, comment, subscribe, do all of that great stuff, and I'll see you in the next video. You have a good day.